Okay guys, so if you picked up your kit, this is what is inside of it. First, you have one fabric that is a print. So this is my print fabric. You have one piece of fabric that is a solid. So this is my solid. This will be the lining, and this will be the outside of your cinch sack. You also have one spool of thread that kind of matches only the outside fabric. Do not worry, you are absolutely going to use this to sew the whole thing. It doesn't have to match this because you won't see this when the project is done. Okay. You also have two 4-inch pieces of ribbon. Those are going to end up being the loops on the bottom so that you can put the strings through it. And then you have two pieces of 60-inch rope, and I've already gone ahead and singed the ends so that they don't ravel. I just burnt it with a flame so that it would hold together and not come apart. The last thing you have is a safety pin, and it should be attached to these ribbons just so that these things don't get lost, because you don't need any of these. Okay, so we're looking here at step 2, and what you want to notice is that the fabric is lengthwise in this step. So what we're going to be doing for two pieces separately, so for the red piece and then separately the turquoise piece, we're going to be folding the long edges 1/2 inch. We're going to measure, iron, and pin, and then stitch it 3/4. So I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second here. And you can look at the directions that are attached to the assignment. So I'm going to fold this. I'm going to use my sewing gauge. If you don't have a sewing gauge at home, you can just use a ruler. And it's supposed to be 1/2 inch. We're folding 1/2 inch. And then we're gonna iron. Now this fabric is it does not have a right and wrong side. So it is totally fine to, as long as you fold both of them the same direction, it will be correct. And you might have noticed, you might have seen that it turned dark when I ironed it. Red fabric does that. And a lot of you have red lining from picking up packets from me. Don't panic, red fabric does that. It turns dark, and it is okay. It will turn back to light once you're done. So you want to iron it. You want to fold it, measure it, iron it, and then pin it. And we're gonna do this all the way down, all 4 sides. So we're gonna do it down both sides of the longer edge of the red, and then I'm gonna do it down both sides of the longer edge of my turquoise or your whatever your other fabric is. So this is the lining. I'm not gonna finish that. I'll finish it later. Notice I'm gonna do this side going the same way. So this side I folded in, so my raw edge is here. This side I'm folding in, so when I turn it over, my right sides will be the side that has none of these raw edges on them. So I'm gonna measure, fold, measure, iron, pin. Okay, fold, measure, iron, pin. And you're going to want to do that for both sides, and you can see that the wrong side, this raw edge, is here. The other side looks very, very nice, and there's no raw edge on the edges. Okay, so that's the lining. This is my outer fabric. Okay, same thing. I'm going to fold it. Measure it 1/2 inch. And again, if you guys do not have a sewing gauge at home, use a ruler. It doesn't have to be an official sewing gauge. Measure it. Iron it. Okay, and you're going to do that for both of the long edges of this piece also. So when you're done pinning all 4 edges, you will sew all 4 edges. So you can see I have all 4 edges, long edges, pinned. So I have 2 edges on the red, and 2 edges on the blue. They're all ironed, measured, pressed, and pinned, okay? So now we're gonna do this step right here where it says to stitch at 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to sew 4 times. We're gonna sew 1, 2, 3, 4 times, okay? So what we wanna do is put the fabric onto your sewing machine with the bulk of the fabric over here off of the machine, okay? And just the, you know, none should be here. That's not how the machine is designed. And then when you start sewing, you want to do a back stitch. You always want to do a back stitch. And while you're sewing, if you feel comfortable, if you pinned like I did, where your pins are going perpendicular to the edge, you can sew right over them. But if that is scary for you, you can just pull them out as you go and put them in your pin cushion as you go. Now, you want to be sewing at 3/8 of an inch, and there should be a measurement on your machine here that says 3/8. If you don't have some sort of a measurement, you can probably just line it up to the edge of the foot. If we were in class, I could tell you that we guaranteed have a 3/8 inch mark, but you know, we're not in class, so things are a little different this year. So you're gonna go from one long end to the other end, and then when you get to the other end, you're gonna do a back stitch. So this is one edge, you're gonna do 3 more after this. So when you finish sewing, go ahead and take out your pins and put them back in your pin cushion. And then we're gonna put the 2 rectangles that we created, these 2, we're gonna put them together with the right sides together. And then this time, we're gonna pin on the ends that we did not sew last time. So it's gonna be the short ends. Let me show you what that's gonna look like. So this is my lining, which technically the fabric doesn't have a right side, wrong side, but now that I've sewn, this side with the raw edge has become my wrong side. The side that looks all nice and neat is now my right side. This fabric is easier to tell. This is pretty obviously the wrong side, and this is the right side. So I'm going to put my right sides together. Like that. And then I'm going to match up the ends. And you know, if you guys notice that your pieces are a tiny bit different, like one's 1/2 inch bigger or smaller than the other piece, I would definitely cut anything before you start, but don't go cut crazy. That's usually where my students make mistakes, is they start just hacking, and then they cut this piece and then they cut that piece because now that one's too big. And I'd say you're probably better off not cutting, or if you want to cut, cutting very, very little, like shaving off the edge. Like you can see this is off by just a little bit. So you could just cut it so that the 2 pieces are the same, but don't go crazy because then you'll just ruin it. What's important is that it's the same this way. So you would need to catch that beforehand. I should have showed you guys that at the beginning of the video, but now that I'm this far in, I can't really do anything about it. So you're gonna pin all the way down both ends. This time it's gonna be the skinny ends. Notice when I'm pinning, I'm going all the way through to the back, coming back up. Okay, and now we're gonna sew these ends. All right, so now we're going to sew what we pinned over here. So we're gonna stitch the short ends. We're gonna stitch this one and then that one and take the pins out when we're done. And we wanna sew at 3/8 of an inch again. So use those markings on your sewing machine. So you wanna set it with your fabric with the raw edge on this side. And if you don't have a 3/8 inch marking, it's a pretty short amount. So you wanna make sure it's just a little bit coming out under the edge of your presser foot. Make sure you do a really solid back stitch right there. That does not mean to go back and forth 50 times. It means sew forward, go right back over it, and come forward again. It's an important spot for you to do a good quality back stitch. Notice I'm sewing over my pins. If that makes you uncomfortable, you do not have to sew over your pins. You can pull them out as you go and just put them right into a pin cushion. Back stitch. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Just flip the fabric, and we're going to do exactly the same thing here. And you do not need to worry about the fact that we sewed with blue thread on the red, because you're never going to see that when the backpack is finished. And I'm using a straight stitch, so hopefully you figured out how to do that on your machine. I wish I could be more help, but I don't know how each of your machines works. I know how all the ones at school work because they're all the same, and they're a lot like this one. All right, and then go ahead and pull out your pins from both sides. All right, so now we are going to flip it so that the right sides are out. So you're gonna take your fabric that looks like this, and you're gonna flip it so that your right sides are all you see, like this and like this. And then what we want to do is we want to iron the ends so that we can get the fabric as close to where we sewed it as possible. And we want to iron this nice and flat. So pull that out and iron it. And iron and get it really, hopefully you guys have an iron somewhere at home you can dig up. Maybe you could borrow one from somebody if you don't have one. And you don't have to have an ironing board. You can use a stack of towels. You could stack up a couple of towels and just iron on that. That works totally fine. Like, that's what I did all through college. So trust me, you don't need an ironing board. So I'm ironing both ends so that it's gonna lay very, very flat. Now, this part is gonna be where the strings will go through eventually, so it's really important you're doing a good job on this part so that it's easy to get those strings through. Okay, so I ironed them and then I pinned the edges like this. You don't need a lot of pins, it's just to keep it so it's all nice and neat. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sew down the skinny edge at 6/8 of an inch. It's really important you do this step right, okay? So if you don't have a measurement on your sewing machine, you can use your sewing gauge and you can measure down and you can mark it with a pencil. So you would want to do it like this. You just get your sewing gauge and then you're gonna measure it, move the sewing gauge, measure it. And you know, that's if you don't have markings on your sewing machine. Usually sewing machines do have markings. Mine has markings, but it's actually not the desired ones. So I have to sort of improvise and see where it fits. The ones I have at school, of course, have perfect markings, which is great. So I'm gonna sew right along the edge here because that's gonna line up the needle with where my pencil marks are. And again, this is where we're gonna put the ropes through, so it's very, very important you do a good job of this and sew it very straight. And you can see I'm lining it up on the edge here, and I'm following the pencil marks I made. Really important to get that good quality back stitch right there. So you want to have a nice back stitch and a very straight stitch all the way down, and a really good back stitch here also. Okay, so you're gonna use your ribbon now. So you're gonna grab your 2 4-inch pieces. They were in your kit and I've already measured them, and you should have 2 of them, so hopefully you didn't lose them. And then we are going to fold our fabric in half with the 2 short ends lined up, meaning hamburger. So we're gonna take, this is what we have. This is my lining. This is my good fabric that I wanna see on the outside. And I'm gonna fold it in half with the lining showing. Okay, this step is very much the most complicated step in the whole thing. So make sure you're tuned in, okay? So the lining out, first thing I wanna do is match this up and pin it here on both sides. And that's just to make sure everything's gonna match up nicely. You want the top to match and you want that seam to match right there. Okay, then, and this is kind of a complicated diagram here, but it's really important. So lining here, what you just sewed, that was the last thing you sewed there, and that is this here. You can see the pencil marks, okay? And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the ribbon in the bottom corner. So if you think about a cinch sack and how it works, this is where the rope is gonna go through, and then it's gonna loop through that ribbon right there, okay? So you have to fold your ribbon with the loop side like this. The 2 raw edges we're going to pop in down here at the bottom, because when we unfold, flip this, we want this to pop out, okay? So you're going to right down here with this pin up here is really important. Fold this in half. Put this in between the right sides, okay? So in the middle. And we're gonna pull it all the way down to the bottom so that these 2 edges, it goes lining, outside, one side of the ribbon, the other side of the ribbon, outside, then lining. And I'm gonna put a pin there. And you probably only need 2 pins between here and the top, just to keep everything lined up. Remember, you wanna line up all 4 layers. Okay, so like that. You're not gonna sew past here. These stay open because that's where you're gonna put your strings. So don't sew past this. You're gonna do exactly the same thing on the other side. Pull this down so it's nice and flat. Line up the fabric so they're as lined up as possible. Fold my ribbon in half. Loop side goes in. Raw edges here on the edge. Put a pin in there to keep it in place. And then we're gonna sew it. So we're looking at this diagram next. This is what we're gonna be doing. This is this. And notice it says do not sew channel. That's where our ribbons are gonna go, not our ribbons, our strings are gonna go through. And you wanna make sure that you leave that open, okay? If you sew that closed, you're not gonna be able to put your strings through there. So on the diagram, it says that we want to back stitch starting right below that, back stitch, sew all the way down, back stitch again. You want to do a very thorough but neat back stitch where the ribbon is pinned, because the ribbon's down here and we want to make sure we give it a little anchor, a little extra stitch there, because that's going to bear the weight of whatever's in your backpack. So to do this, we're gonna put this onto the machine, and like I've said over and over again now, we're gonna start sewing here. Do not sew above that. So we're gonna start sewing there. This one is again 6/8. Okay, and we're gonna sew all the way down. And then remember, the ribbon's right here, so I wanna make sure that I do a very solid, controlled back stitch there. so that my ribbon is secure. We're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. You're going to want to make sure you do a really good back stitch because that's going to be opening and closing. That's the top of the backpack. And then my ribbon, I can see it. It's right there. So I want to make sure that at the bottom, I do a very good back stitch. I'm even going to do a little extra. Okay, so for the last few steps, what we're going to do first is to flip it so it's right side out. If you did it right, you're going to have 2 ribbon loops sticking out. Okay, so let's look and see what that looks like. You're going to hold this up. You'll flip it so that you have your right side out. And there are the loops, okay? So you want to have ribbon loops. If you did it right, if you listened to all the directions and looked at the diagrams, that's what you're going to get. And you want those very close to the bottom like this. Okay, so now we have our 2 strings, and they were in your kit, and they're 60 inches long, and like I told you before, they already melted the ends. And then what you want to do is take your safety pin, that's also part of the kit, and you want to put it through the string, go through once, twice, okay? And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to just pick a side. It doesn't matter which side you start with. And you're going to go through one side. You're going to go through one side and then come back through the other side. So if you sewed this well and you measured it well and the whole time, you know, you were paying attention to those measurements on the directions, this will not be hard. But if you really hacked it up and did not pay attention to the measurements, this will be very, very hard, maybe even impossible. Okay, so remember how when you sewed that last part, you made sure to leave this open so that we could get the safety pin out. And then we're going to go back through the other side. So I did one, and now I'm going back through the other side. And it's going to come out because I did not sew all the way up, which is perfect. So that's the other one. Okay, so I have one side done. I'm going to undo the safety pin. I'm going to put the safety pin on the other string. Okay, really secure. Now this time, so these are here sticking out on this end. We need to make this one so they stick out on this end. So we're going to start on this side this time. And the second one is a little trickier because, you know, there's a little bit of a competition in there. It has the other rope to get by. So you can manage it just like the elastic in the pajama pants. It's the same idea. And sometimes people tell me that's the hardest part of the pajama pants. So we're now putting it through the exact same place. Both of the ropes are in here, in this casing. Okay, so it's coming out. You just have to sort of wiggle it around to get it out of there. I can feel it. There it goes. Aha. Okay, and now same thing we did last time. There it goes. Same thing we did last time. We're gonna turn the corner, get those out of the way, because those are the other strings. So just get those out of the way. And we're gonna dive right back through, making a U-turn. And if you look at the diagram, I do feel like that's actually a pretty good diagram that can help you. Okay. So now you'll have 2 strings coming out of each side, and when you pull on them, it cinches up. If it doesn't cinch up, what you did was you put 1 through on top and 1 through on the bottom. You didn't do the U-turn. If you look at the diagram, it shows you have to make the U-turn. You go up, come back, go down, tie a knot. We're going to do that now. So now all you need to do, take off the safety pin, is put one of them through and tie a knot. And I'll tell you, I get more questions about how do I tie a knot than I do about this whole project whenever we make this in class. You just tie a knot. Like, there's no secret to it. You just make any kind of knot that you can make that will hold. I don't care what kind of knot you make. Same thing here, one of them through the ribbon. Tie a knot. Anything that'll hold. And then you have your cinch sack, and you can open it up and close it up, and you can put your PE clothes in it, or you could carry something on your bicycle in it. I don't know, whatever, but there it is.